Now, this is a video that has really been long in coming. If if you are someone who follows me or looks at my content over on Facebook, you might be familiar with a specific person, a specific follower of mine over on Facebook has been on my case about this particular video and this particular topic for a long time now. And he is very interested in what I have to say about this because, according to that person's belief, they seem to think like I started off really criticizing the government, but at some point in time, there may have been a clandestine meeting between the government and myself, and I changed my views. According to that person, they are sure that Balize House the main organization of the ruling PNM government in Trinidad and Tobago, that they have their tentacles in on me. And my response to that is usually, well, when you speak to someone over at Balize House, tell them the check that they're supposed to be sending my way, the fee that I'm supposed to be charging to make sure that I toe the government line, I'm not receiving it. So, Balize House, if you are supposed to be sending me that check, it was lost in the mail apparently. Well, of course, I'm being a bit facetious. There's no check to be sent anywhere. It's just been a while in coming. And for most topics, especially topics like this, I try to at least wait a while till as much of the facts are out there as possible so we could more accurately speak about it. And I'm speaking specifically here about the saga that is unfolding or has unfolded to some extent between a king's council from Jamaica living in England and the Trinidad and Tobago government. We're going to get into that. Right before we dive in further into this video is being brought to you by Mindful Education. If you are interested in starting with a learning pod or putting someone, a child, into a learning pod, we have Mindful Education learning pods available from the ages of preschool going straight up to CXC ages. If you are so interested, head over to Instagram, Mindful with 2Ls _ education. Feel free to follow us there, and you have the contact information. So this entire saga, it's kind of difficult to say exactly where it started from. Now, the main interest in it might have actually started around the 2016, 2017 time period, around there, but the actual actions that got this whole thing rolling trace their way back to early 2010s when the People's Partnership government just came into power. And we're going to see if we could follow this storyline as it morphs and mutates and see if we could make sense of exactly what is going on here. Vincent Nelson unraveled. From conspirator to whistleblower to uncooperative witness. A deathbed resolution to make amends, triggered by a call from a former Attorney General, led Vincent Nelson King's counsel to unburden himself and spill the beans about alleged wrongdoing detailed in his notarized statement of October 5th, 2017. This according to the amended defense of the Attorney General submitted in the civil lawsuit between Nelson and the AG, and in other relevant documents submitted in the criminal proceedings. Apparently, the arc of the Nelson episodic storyline has followed dramatic paths during the last decade. Between October 2010, so we're getting a nice refresher here from the very beginning. How did this all begin? Between October 2010 and February 2022, based on the facts, he moved from being a conspirator to a whistleblower and then to an uncooperative witness with respect to his relationship to former Attorney General Annan Ramlogan and former UNC Senator Gerald Ramdeen. From a King's Counsel reaping the alleged corrupt rewards of state largesse, to a cancer patient preparing for death, to a cancer-free man professionally disgraced and under investigation fighting to regain all that he thought he lost. So, really and truly the star of this story, at least from this perspective, might be the King's Counsel, Mr. Vincent Nelson, because it follows a bit of his meanderings in life over the last decade plus. He was a very lucrative hired lawyer under the partnership government. Then he was a whistleblower to the PNM government of the 2015 to 2020 era. And then now he's an uncooperative witness since around, was it 2019 or 2020, somewhere around there, he started becoming an uncooperative witness. Interesting moves. It all began on October 6th, 2017, when Justice Ricky Rahim granted a judgment in favor of Nelson, dismissing the state's application to strike out Nelson's claim for legal fees, which amounted to approximately £1 million. Bear in mind, I think the exchange rate right now for pounds is somewhere $7-8, but around that time, I believe it was closer 10 to 1. So for ease of transferring, you could kind of think of it as pounds around 10 to 1. So when they say £1 million, they mean, generally speaking, 10 million TT dollars. Nelson had been retained by previous Attorney General Anand Logan in the matter from which £1 million legal fee claim had arisen. This was a matter in the 2010 whole period, a BPTT matter, and he was hired as a lawyer in there, and he didn't receive his £1 million that he was supposed to be paid to for this. According to the AG's amended defense, in the course of the litigation for his claim for outstanding fees, Nelson said former Attorney General Anand Logan contacted him and informed him that he, Ram Logan, was still in possession of letterheads from the Office of the Attorney General. Nelson said Ram Logan also informed him that he was prepared to sign and backdate a letter which would state that the monies claimed by Nelson were due and payable if Nelson agreed to pay 30% of the sums recovered by him to Ram Logan. This is a little piece in the corruption that is often left out. At least a little piece in the alleged corruption that is often left out. So we have the main crux of the matter that we are going to get to. But this was just a little sprinkle in there. And this whole thing would have happened after the main instance of the corruption already went by. So Mr. Former Attorney General Anand Logan at this point would have been out of the Office of Attorney General, and his former party would have been out of governance also. But he allegedly, according to the King's Counsel, was willing to offer the King's Counsel a little bit of corruption inside there. He would backdate a letter, making sure that the King's Counsel would get his money, his 10 million, his £1 million. All that had to happen was he'd have to run a 30% to the former Attorney General. Corruption in all directions. That's bold. That is very bold. If true, it is very bold. The AG's amended defense stated further than that, Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi, this is the next Attorney General under the PNM government, between 2015 and when did he give up that when was he removed from that portfolio? I think that was this year, 2022, I believe, and he was Attorney General for that period. He was informed of this matter by Nelson's attorney, Roger Kawal Singh. Now, if that Roger Kawal Singh name sounds familiar, it should, because there are some allegations about friendliness between that former Attorney General and this Roger Kawal Singh already. That same attorney, Mr. Kawal Singh, is the same attorney that there were allegations about some kind of impropriety in the sale of a vehicle from that same former Attorney General to that same Mr. Kawal Singh. There were some allegations about impropriety there. Same guy. That same attorney Kawal Singh was also one of the members on the disgraced Police Service Commission where all the members basically resigned, and there was a big bacchanal between them and the former commissioner, and allegations that the Prime Minister was attempting to interfere and all of that. Roger Kawal Singh was also a member on that commission. So Mr. Kawal Singh's name is familiar in those circles. Now, this same Mr. Kowalsing was the attorney then for King's Counsel, Mr. Nelson. And he was the one that allegedly approached the then Attorney General with the information that Mr. Nelson was willing to provide. On or around 12th October 2017, Mr. Kowalsing met with Mr. Al-Rawi and informed him that the complainant, Mr. Nelson, had instructed him to advise Mr. Al-Rawi that he had evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Ram Logan and others, and that he, Mr. Nelson, was willing to disclose that information subject to protective undertakings, either at this meeting or the next. Mr. Kowalsing further disclosed to the defendant, that's Mr. Al-Rawi, that the claimant, who is Mr. Nelson, was gravely ill and wished to purge his conscience before he passed away, the AG's amended defense stated. So, according to his attorney, according to the King's Counsel attorney, is the fact that he was diagnosed then with cancer, and he may have been staring his deathbed in its eyes. He was saying, well, I have this heaviness on my conscience and I would like to clear it away. I do not want to die with this on my conscience. So that was the reason, according to his attorney, that he came to Mr. Al-Rawi. Now, there are several other possible reasons inside of there, because some people are alleging that there would be, obviously, some motivation to go to the Attorney General for that, because at that point in time, the Attorney General and the new government was stymieing that 10 million that he was supposed to collect. Although the justice, they already said that the ruling was in his favor, he was supposed to be paid that £1 million, the government was appealing that, and that entire thing could have tied up his money in a lengthy process. So, by providing this and being on good terms with the government, it is possible that that could have sped up his payment of even the 10 million. So even besides his guilty conscience watching his deathbed coming, there were other motivating factors that could have possibly encouraged him to come forward with this new, well, not new, but this well-remembered case of corruption. The notarized statement. In the notarized statement, Nelson said in late 2010 he was invited to meet with then Attorney General Anand Ram Logan to discuss the undertaking of legal services on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. He was informed that Ram Logan wanted to retain him to lead a probe into matters concerning Petrotrin. Ramdean was also retained. According to Nelson in his notarized statement, I returned to Trinidad on 5th of November 2011 to commence work on the Petrotrin forensic probe. I was scheduled to leave on the 13th of November. During the visit, Gerald Ramdean informed me that Anand Ram Logan wished to have a meeting with me concerning the probes. The meeting took place in the Attorney General's office. In attendance was Ram Logan, Ramdean, and myself. The only subject of conversation at the meeting, raised for the first time, was the demand by Ram Logan for payment by me to Ram Logan of a percentage of the fees I was to receive from engagement on the probes. It was made clear that this was not a request, but a requirement. According to King's Counsel Mr. Vincent Nelson, at some point in time in 2011, the then Attorney General summoned him to his office in attendance or in company of another lawyer and told him he has to pay. If you want these legal briefs from the government, and bear in mind, they call the kinds of fees that were being paid during that time, there were hundreds of millions of dollars in outside legal fees to be paid to lawyers. And what he is alleging is the Attorney General had a scheme where if you got some of these briefs, if you got some of this government money, you had to return some to the Attorney General for giving you that favor. Nelson agreed to pay Ram Logan 10% of the gross fees received by him for any work undertaken by the government of Trinidad and Tobago or state enterprises, according to both notarized statement and the Attorney General's amended defense. The statement of October 26, 2017, which was notarized by John Jeffrey, further stated Ram Logan wanted the funds to be paid to Ram Dean, who would then make available the funds to Ram Logan. In our discussion, I raised the fact that this could cause problems for all involved if it was discovered. Ram Logan said that to disguise the fact that the funds were being paid to him, Ram Dean and I should agree the fiction that the payments were being made to Ram Dean as part of an agreement whereby I was part of Ram Dean's chambers. Notwithstanding this fiction, it should be emphasized that at no time was I ever part of Ram Dean's chambers. I never used any of the facilities or his chambers and visited it no more than 5 times during the entire period I worked in Trinidad over a period of 4 years. So, what he is saying is the plan that they concocted was as such that it would be difficult to directly just pay money to Mr. Ram Logan. So what he would do is have a go-between. And they would form an agreement, make a scheme where they would make it seem like he is paying Mr. Ram Dean for use of his legal chambers. I suppose that payment would be around 10%. And he would pay that to Mr. Ram Dean, and Mr. Ram Dean would then figure out a way to get that money on to the next person. The payments left a trail also. Attached to the notarized statement were copies of screenshots showing payments made from Nelson's NatWest bank account in the United Kingdom and his Sagicor bank account in Jamaica to Ram Dean's Scotia bank account in Trinidad and Tobago. Nelson confirmed in a subsequent interview with the ACIB that a total of £200,367, that's around 2 million plus, was paid in kickbacks during the period of October 2010 to September 9th, 2015 by him. A lot of money. Kawal Singh met with Al-Rawi on or about November 5th, 2017 and disclosed a copy of the statement which Nelson was proposing to make. So, Mr. Nelson wrote down what happened. He provided evidence of payments, and his lawyer supplied this to the then Attorney General. Now, I like to keep in mind that at this point, it's important to keep in mind at this point, all of these allegations here about the payment trail, about the nature of the scheme, about how much money was paid, about the meeting inside of the Attorney General's office, all of that has not been recanted. Widely, it is being reported by some who would have a lean to that political side. Widely, it's being reported that the men have been freed. The men have been found innocent of this crime. That's not true. The case has been discontinued for the while because the witness, Mr. Nelson, does not want to testify. But he is not saying that those statements are not true. As of now, it would seem, according to him, the statements are still very much factual. And I consider that to be a big problem. The fact that it's not, the question here isn't even yet if the men were guilty of the crime, but just technicalities in and around the whole thing. This whole thing, you could clearly see that you're dealing with lawyers. You could clearly see that all parties involved are lawyers, because every step in this entire murky mess is tied up in the courts. And lots of lawyers are still making lots of money off of this. And the nature of law is, it could seem like even if this initial civil matter could be cured and solved, this whole thing may never actually come to any kind of legal conclusion. It would always have another court case and another court case and another court case. If you have the legal acumen and the money, it's very hard for justice to catch you. It's very hard. And even further, on his notarized, signed statement, he went a little more into some of the details. Nelson to ACIB. Ram Logan told me AG salary too small. Attorney Annan Ram Logan Senior Counsel allegedly offered an apology to Vincent Nelson King's counsel for asking for a kickback, saying the money he was earning as Attorney General at that time was very small, and he needed to supplement the salary to survive financially. The conversation allegedly occurred during a car ride to Nelson's home in Jamaica. This revelation was in police statements that Nelson gave to the officers of the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau in January and February 2019 while in Barbados, and in April and May 2019 while in Trinidad and Tobago. So, after his initial statements were given to the Attorney General passed them on to the police and the DPP, and the investigation continued there, and they interviewed Mr. Nelson again. And in that interview with Mr. Nelson, he gave even further evidence that the Attorney General told, the former Attorney General told him, the money too small, so he needs a little something extra. He needs some lanyap to make sure that he could survive and continue living properly and comfortably. Of course, that's understandable. What's the Attorney General's salary in Trinidad and Tobago? Somewhere around $40,000 or something like that. Of course, that's just too little money. That who is supposed to be able to survive on that kind of money? Of course, that's way too little for anyone to survive on. Sure. But the current problems with this didn't arise from the corruption of that, the alleged corruption of that People's Partnership administration. The current problems with the investigation stem from a deal that was struck by the former Attorney General, Mr. Al-Rawi, and Mr. Vincent Nelson. Nelson already being paid $1 million in indemnity agreement with government. Almost $1 million in legal fees have been paid by the state to Vincent Nelson King's Counsel as part of the purported indemnity agreement signed by the former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi. Correspondence between Nelson's attorneys in London and Al-Rawi in December 2020 shows invoices for October and December 2018, January, February, and April 2019 were paid, amounting to £85,759. The firm BCL solicitors, in the letter dated December 17, 2020, also said by paying the BCL invoices, the government has already unequivocally accepted liability under the indemnity for legal expenses. The firm also reminded Al-Rawi of earlier correspondence about payment of over $6 million in outstanding legal fees to the firm and Nelson's attorney, Roger Kawal Singh. So let's see if we could get back a little bit at the beginning of the indemnity agreement, seeing as that's where it seems like a lot of the bacchanal is located. Nelson had agreed to drop his $10 million claim against the government for unpaid legal fees when former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi indemnified him from prosecution and liability for providing information on the alleged legal fees kickback conspiracy with attorneys Anand Ramlogan and Gerald Ramdeen. Nelson, who pleaded guilty to the alleged kickback for state briefs scheme, eventually received the $10 million between 2017 and 2019 during Al-Rawi's tenure as Attorney General. So, he got his $10 million that he was owed. That's one. In July 2021, Al-Rawi disclosed documents on legal fees paid to private attorneys by the Office of the Attorney General. The list showed Nelson receiving payments of $10 million between 2017 and 2018 and $768,000 between 2018 and 2019. He also allegedly received $40 million between 2010 and 2015, a previous list presented in Parliament had said. So, the problem with a lot of this is this indemnity agreement starts to look like too much of a sweetheart deal. In this indemnity agreement, he's promised that he wouldn't be prosecuted for any of this. This entire issue he will not be prosecuted for. And okay, that might be understood. Makes sense in an agreement like this. You're offering us testimony, the only testimony that could actually get the case cracked and done. So okay, fine, we do not prosecute you. But also, they're promising to pay his lawyer fees. That is a lot. That is a lot. To pay all the lawyer fees involved in everything around this, and that's where a lot of this money is being racked up. And especially when you're looking at this and seeing that the lawyer that the fees would have had to have been paid to was Mr. Kawal Singh, who was also already known to have a relationship with Mr. Al-Rawi. It could seem very suspicious that the Attorney General is offering money for information on a political opponent, and the money he's offering is going to some of his friends, it's hard for that to not look weird. And all right, okay, fine. The main point of this, the base issue in this, is corruption, and we want to get to the base and the bottom of corruption. But does it make sense that that any means necessary would be the path we take to get to the bottom of this corruption? And we're seeing now that the any means necessary technique led into quite a bit of difficulties. And you could wonder if the any means necessary technique was being used to further corruption. Wouldn't it be sad that if even in the pursuit of stamping out corruption, we are perpetrating more corruption? Wouldn't that be a sad irony? Al-Rawi received Nelson's statement on October 26, 2017, and said, as a result, he signed the indemnity agreement on behalf of the government in November 2017. Al-Rawi set out the details behind the signing of the agreement and the procedural history involving Nelson's demand for payment in a statement to police on April 9th, 2019. So many dates inside of this. On Monday, that's recently now, the DPP discontinued the criminal prosecution against Ramlogan and Ramdeen. He said Nelson was not willing to give evidence in that matter until his claim for breach of the alleged indemnity agreement came to an end. Gaspard said it would be unfair to leave the case against the former Attorney General and UNC Senator in limbo until the outcome of Nelson's civil claim. I read an opinion piece that was wondering if there wasn't some other way to do it. Because if the man already gave a signed statement, and if he was already found guilty and he confessed to it, regardless of his civil proceedings, isn't it possible to still use his statement for the same criminal matter? Is it really necessary to pause the matter just because he has a civil matter pending? I am not sure. I am not sure how all of that is working. The purported indemnity agreement assured Nelson's statement would not be released in Parliament or in the public, nor would his name. And I think that was the most insane part about this whole indemnity agreement. The paying his lawyers, a little suspicious, but all right. The protection from prosecution, I think that's probably pretty understandable. But promising that his name would not be released and that this wouldn't be brought up in Parliament, I don't know how something like that would have been able to be carried out. How could you plan to prosecute these two former members of another government? How could you have an idea that you're going to prosecute them and the main only witness is going to remain anonymous while he was a co-conspirator in the entire thing? Like, who really expected this to actually turn out that way? I'm not sure how this was going to work out like that. How was it ever going to be possible to keep all of this a secret and still go on prosecuting those two men? Would that have ever been a feasible thing? But that was part of the indemnity agreement, at least according to Mr. Vincent Nelson, that was agreed upon between him and the then Attorney General. And the reality is that clause of the indemnity agreement is actually the most problematic one right now. The thing is, though, I wonder how all of these decisions were made in the moment, and it could seem to me, looking back on it, some of these decisions were made with other considerations in mind. So, for example, as his lawyer pointed out back then, the King's Counsel was seeing death right in front of him. He was seeing the possibility that he was going to die very soon, and he wanted to clear up some things because of that. And maybe in some of that, he wanted money too. King's Counsel, cancer free. Nelson's money woes. As of December 2021, convicted King's Counsel Vincent Nelson was cancer-free. MRI scans done in December 2019, 2020, and 2021 showed no signs of cancer. Nelson, 64, was diagnosed with cancer in March 2016. Sometime in October 2017, his then attorney Roger Kawal Singh, and we know that's when the indemnity agreement was then made. Nelson took a sabbatical from practice and was treated in New York. In 2017, cancer returned and he again had surgery in March 2018. MRI showed he was cancer-free and he said he planned to return to work but was advised to hold off until January 2019. Now, the thing with all of these dates, why they are very important, is because you could chart the course from him being diagnosed with cancer in 2016, the indemnity agreement in 2017. Bear in mind, 2018, this isn't really public yet. 2019, he has to deal with the DPP. You see, the indemnity agreement was between him and, well, the Attorney General or the government. But the real deals being based on what you could be charged with, what you could be prosecuted with, and under the purview of the Attorney General. The Attorney General could give recommendations to the DPP, but that's under the purview of the DPP, and that's an independent office. So when he reached the DPP, he was actually convicted and prosecuted of a crime. And that obviously would have been made public. On June 6, 2019, Nelson pleaded guilty to conspiring to commit money laundering and conspiracy to commit an act of corruption arising out of the alleged legal fees kickback scheme. He was charged a month earlier, so he was charged in 2019. In May 2019, he was permanently excluded from membership of the 39 Essex Street Chambers in London because of his conviction. After his conviction, he tried to get work at the commercial law chambers and even a utility company he previously represented, but was unsuccessful in getting work. Nelson said if not for his conviction, which he also claims was not part of his agreement with the government, he would have returned to practice law for 10 more years until his retirement in 2028 when he turned 71. So, he got into this indemnity agreement in 2017. The agreement was passed on to the DPP and he was charged and prosecuted in 2019. He is saying that conviction, that prosecution was against his indemnity agreement. That was not supposed to happen. And upon him being convicted, upon him being charged, his prestigious law firm in England, of course, dropped him. Because, of course, no law firm, no client would want their lawyer to be the suspect, well, not only the suspect, to be convicted of money laundering at a governmental level. That's a liability to have as your lawyer. And bear in mind, he was a tax attorney. He's dealing in tax systems. Tax is basically between you and the government for a large part. You wouldn't want it to be that you have a tax attorney who is convicted of money laundering and bribery on a nationwide level in another nation, in the Commonwealth. No, that's not going to work. So, of course, he wasn't able to get any work in his own law firm. No one was able to hire him. He's a pariah. He cannot get any more work. And he is blaming that on the government because the indemnity agreement he signed, he gave evidence that obviously implicated himself, and the government promised that although you implicated yourself here, you are not the target of this. We will not prosecute you for it. And then 2 years later, he was prosecuted for it. And his nightmare of not being able to practice law anymore, that came to truth. That came to reality. And he's blaming the government for it. And he wants them to pay him for the 10 years of lost labor. He's claiming $96 million for these lost years of work. Nelson said he had no funds saved for a pension, and it was always his intention to return to work as he was cured of cancer. And he went on there to list out quite a bit of his money woes. He was being foreclosed on, money was running out. His father died in Jamaica, in which year that was 2020, and he didn't even have enough money to fly home to Jamaica to be at his father's funeral. The man was having a really difficult go at it, and he is blaming all of that on the Trinidad and Tobago government. Now, the thing is, I think he's right. It is the government's fault. It is our government's fault because our government made the deal with him that made him implicate himself, and then our government made that whole implication public. And it's kind of unfortunate that him implicating himself and his two co-conspirators, he is the only one being punished by this right now. His two co-conspirators, allegedly, in Trinidad here, are still very much practicing law, while he cannot, interestingly enough. So I understand why he would want to blame the government. However, on the flip side of that, if you did indeed commit a crime, I mean, granted the government made a promise to you that maybe was a foolish promise in the first place, but you did commit the crime. I mean, yeah, they said that you wouldn't have to face those consequences for it, but it's not like they were lying about you. You admitted to committing a crime, so as much as it is their fault for releasing the information, it's kind of your fault from the beginning of that for being involved in criminality in the first place. So while I could understand where he is coming from and why he might want to blame the government, I don't know how much pity I might really have for him. And some other folks who also do not share that pity for him would be members of the opposition party. Munilal Nelson sold his soul in indemnity deal. Oropouche East MP Rudal Munilal has accused attorney Vincent Nelson, main witness in the collapse corruption case, of selling his soul in an indemnity deal to recover money owed to him by the People's Partnership. Nelson, we know what he did. At the UNC's meeting, Munilal explained this matter has its genesis when the same Nelson was working under the partnership administration and there was outstanding monies owed to him when we left office, so he took the government to court for his money. He claimed a PNM official, this is Mr. Munilal claiming this, a PNM official approached Nelson with the deal. When he gone to court, somebody gone to him and say, don't worry, you could get your money. You have to fabricate something. This thing began with him saying, don't call my name, don't show my face, don't tell nobody is me. And I don't know about the fabrication side because nowhere has Mr. Nelson said he has fabricated that. And there is a paper trail of monies being paid. But he is right in the sense that it did start with Mr. Nelson basically saying, don't call my name, don't show my face, don't tell anybody it's me. That was how this started. Now, I don't know how they really expected that to continue going that way, but somehow they did. Mr. Al-Rawi, though, is saying that, he's saying that over and over. Now, this whole thing is not his fault. He had advice in signing that indemnity deal and making that indemnity deal in the first place. He called two senior lawyers as giving him advice over that, and he is saying he had no part to play in Mr. Nelson being charged or prosecuted. So it wasn't him who broke the deal. Al-Rawi, I had no control over ACIB charging Nelson. Former Attorney General Faris Al-Rawi is saying he had no influence on the investigations of the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau. This was the response to a claim by convicted King's Counsel who alleged that Al-Rawi had control of the ACIB and any representation he made that Nelson should not be prosecuted was binding on the government. Nelson is now suing the state over that. But Al-Rawi is saying that he has no control over ACIB. The Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau isn't under the control of the Attorney General. That's under the control of the police service. That's independent of the government. And it's supposed to be, if we're being honest, that's something that is supposed to be independent. The problem with this case is the way how the indemnity deal was structured and spoken about. It could nearly seem like it was suggested like the Attorney General does have some power over the law enforcement side. What he is saying is he actually had no power over that. The former Attorney General, who was questioned by the ACIB in July on government's agreement with Nelson, told police the indemnity agreement was not given to them or the Director of Public Prosecution when he got it because the matter was assigned to the minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General, Stuart Young. Al-Rawi told police it was Young who gave Nelson's statement about the alleged legal fees kickback conspiracy to investigative authorities in the United Kingdom. But he did draw to the DPP's attention the clause in the indemnity agreement that spoke of a recommendation that Nelson should not face criminal charges. The former Attorney General says that he did indeed make the recommendations. He recommended to the DPP that they not charge him, but he has no say over what the DPP actually does. He maintains the DPP and the police carried out their functions without his interference. He also told the police he could not say whether Nelson knew that he could be charged if his statement was disclosed to the DPP and ACIB, but reminded that the former was a senior attorney with his own independent legal counsel. Al-Rawi also maintained he had nothing to tell Nelson about the DPP's accepting his recommendation. So Al-Rawi is saying, I did give the recommendation. I did my part as part of the indemnity. I recommended to the DPP that you not be charged. And I don't know what he expected to happen when it reached to the DPP. But Al-Rawi is saying that the man was a king's counsel. He's familiar with the law. He was supposed to know, I suppose, that if this information was going to be acted upon, very likely you are going to have some further consequences to pay for it. I don't know if he expected that Trinidad was even more of a banana republic where the government has supreme control over the law enforcement side and they could have just waved a wand and he would have nothing to worry about there, but apparently not. But as I said before, it seems like the main worry about the indemnity as far as the King's Counsel is concerned is the fact that it was made public not only in Trinidad but in the United Kingdom. And for that one, the blame seems to fall squarely at the feet of the junior minister then, the minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General back then, Mr. Stuart Young. Al-Rawi blames Young. Al-Rawi also allegedly told Nelson that his statement had been wrongly disclosed to the NCA by Young. Both Young and Nelson met on a British Airways flight from TT to London Gatwick in March 2020. Nelson said Young came to his seat to converse. After Young was told that it was Al-Rawi who said that Young had disclosed the statement, the latter replied that as a lawyer, he wouldn't be so stupid because he knew it would be a breach of the agreement. Nelson said he was assured he would not be prosecuted. He said because of the wrongful disclosure to the NCA, he had to cooperate and face possible prosecution and jail in the United Kingdom, or be extradited to TT, both of which would destroy his professional career. Now, the interesting thing to me about Mr. Stuart Young, the allegations that Mr. Stuart Young on that flight said that he wouldn't be so stupid to reveal that to the NCA, is it doesn't seem like he still has that view. Young has since defended his decision to hand over Nelson's statement to the UK's National Crime Agency. It can never be a breach of any proper legal agreement or law to provide evidence to a legitimate law enforcement agency, he said on a Facebook post. Tough luck to Mr. Nelson, because Mr. Young seems like he's saying, yes, it was me, and I gave it to a legitimate law enforcement agency, so nothing could be wrong with that. And maybe legally, nothing is wrong. So there's so much more to get into the details inside of this whole case. But the thing is a legal mess. And I think it's a legal mess on purpose because everyone involved are lawyers and they're trying to cover their tracks on their own. There's enough blame to head around and go around in all directions. Starting from the King's Counsel himself, because if his statement is to be believed, he was part of a criminal conspiracy in the first place. That's your fault for entering. Then, if his indemnity agreement is to be believed, well, it seems like he got some wool pulled over his eye in terms of what he believed the government could have done, and they actually were not able to do. Now, the thing is, the government isn't successful in prosecuting the two people that they wanted to prosecute. So for Mr. Nelson and for the government, that's a lose. They're losing because it's not like Mr. Nelson is winning in this. He hasn't won his $100 million case against the government yet. I don't know if he will, but right now he cannot work. So he is losing because of the statement he gave to the government. The government is losing because their case cannot go forward against the two people they really wanted to charge. And now it is seeming very suspicious that the government gave this sweetheart deal. It's either that they were very excited to get these two people, and so excited that it seems like by any means necessary was the mantra they chose, or you could wonder sometimes someone like me, when you're feeling a bit more conspiratorial minded, you could wonder, did they do all of this on purpose? Are they doing all of this on purpose? Are they purposefully complicating these issues so much that no one would ever really face consequences from it? Because okay, Mr. Nelson cannot work, but he has already been paid multiple times over. He's been paid for the 10 million he was owed. He's been paid something like 40 million during the time of the partnership government. He was paid even more during the PNM government for legal services too. So he isn't struggling to make money. He's struggling to make money now, but he has already made the money in this. He isn't coming out at a loss for this. The only people that seem to be losing here are us, the taxpayers, because all the lawyers involved are getting paid and paid again and paid again and paid time over time, while we are the ones doing the paying. What do you think? Drop a comment, tell me what you think about this whole convoluted mess. Did you follow along? Does it all make sense? Does it add up? Is there something missing from the whole equation? Leave your comment and tell me what you think. I've told you, at least to some extent, what I think about it. Your turn. Tell me what you think. Drop a comment, leave a like. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not yet subscribed. Please do hit that like button. It does help, and there's some effort into these things. So please do hit that like button, and I will see you in the next video.